The Minister of Finance, Wale Edun, says Nigeria is not in a position, at least not in a good position, to continue to rely on borrowings. The coordinating minister for the economy said this while appearing before the Senate Committee on Finance to defend details of the medium-term expenditure framework and the fiscal strategy paper. Edun admits that Nigeria's debt servicing has reached an all-time high of 98% of the country's revenue, and it will simply make a bad situation worse if the country continues to rely on borrowing.
Clearly, in the environment that we have now, both internationally as well as nationally, we are in no position to rely on borrowing. We have an existing borrowing program, and as distinguished Senator Abiru has said, our attempt and our direction of travel is to reduce reliance on borrowing, reduce the quantum and the percentage of deficit financing in the 2024 budget. Government needs to not just maintain its activity, it needs to spend more. So government needs even more. If you look at government spending, if you look at the budget as a percentage of GDP, ours is one of the lowest, maybe around 10%. Even Ghana is at 25%.
There are quite a lot of shortfalls that we are having as a result of issuance of waivers. And we don't know who is issuing those waivers. Is it FIRS, is it NIPC, or the Federal Ministry of Finance? There is also a project that is ongoing. You look at the dailies today. They've captured it based on what Customs said yesterday about the e-custom. A committee like Committee on Finance will want to know what kind of agreement Nigeria is going into. What is the value of that contract that is going? How much are we expecting that by the time they deploy we'll be making? So that we don't go into signing agreements that have led Nigeria have signed so many agreements that have led us to so many judgment debts.
Right, so we have two economists, Paul Alaje and Odelim Enwebara, joining us now. It's a good thing they are both economists. They'll help us understand exactly where Nigeria is at this point. Paul Alaje, let me start with you, and good to see both of you gentlemen. So we're hearing from the finance minister and coordinator of the economy that Nigeria is not in a good position to continue to rely on borrowing. First, I'd like to get your thoughts on that, and what are the alternatives? We can't rely on borrowing. Where do we get the funds to fix infrastructure and all other business of government?
Yeah, thank you so very much for having me. I remember that a number of years ago, 2 years to be specific, I spoke with your colleagues on similar topics, and I projected that by 2025, Nigeria will have to borrow to service debt, not to buy yacht, which we have recently seen in the budget that was presented to the National Assembly, not to even buy vehicle for members of National Assembly, not to pay salaries, but by 2025, Nigeria may have to borrow to service debt. We have seen that we have gotten to the brink of it by spending 98% of all revenue generated to service debt, which means all we are spending as a nation from our revenue on ourselves, whether capital expenditure or recorded expenditure, is only 2%. The implication is that all presidential trip, the vehicles that members of National Assembly are buying, 168 million naira per vehicle, per the number of persons that is in that assembly, and paying teachers, paying lecturers, labor, everybody working at least under federal government, they are 98% borrowed. In fact, it may be more. Only 2% is what goes from our revenue into it. So what is the way forward? The way forward is that we must become innovative. First, we have to block leakages. How can we be cutting checks of 60 billion naira every 4 years, saying that we don't believe in our economy, we don't believe in our system, and say Japanese economy takes 60 billion from Nigeria on annual basis, not because we want to do anything, but because we feel that our members of House of Representatives, they need to be in a brand new vehicle when the nation is bleeding at 98% of all revenue to service debt. But we still cut a check to give to them. So how do we block leakages? It's so very, very important. Again, where are the revenue windows? Should we continue to mine the little or tiny revenue? And I must say this, Nigeria rebased, and we forget too quickly, 2014 or so, we rebased the economy. It's not that the economy grew to this level. We actually rebased, that's why we got to this point. But after rebasing, what has happened to our economy in the real sense of it? Growth, apart from 2014, have continued to slow. We've not been able to even get to 2015 growth rate because the fact is that we did not grow in the real sense of it to the kind of revenue we have today. So we need to block leakages and find unique revenue for those who should pay more to pay so that we can have a country that is better, that is growing, and become better managers with our resources.
I think Nigerians can feel, Paul. Let me bring in Odelim. Odelim, this is not one, two government officers speaking the same week on Nigeria's economy. It brings us to some of the key concerns that many Nigerians have been talking about. How can Nigeria really and truly, in fact, let's start, is Nigeria truly and really broke?
Suleiman, you don't need to ask that question because you know the answer. Nigeria is broke, so you don't need to ask that question. I think at the end of the day, what we need to look at is how do we get out of our situation? It's not, noise cannot solve that problem. It's going back to restructure Nigeria. We all know that. I spoke, I think it was about a month ago or thereabout. I said we can generate $500 billion through a means that we already know. We must find alternative way to generate serious revenue. It's not whether they buy a car or don't buy a car. Those will not solve the problem. Cutting costs will not solve the problem because the kind of costs they are talking about also is part of the economy. Because besides buying cars from Japan and all the rest of them, there are so many things that's part of the economy. I mean, when you pay salaries, it goes down to the trickle-down economics. I think at the end of the day, government will ask for those men and women who have greater idea, innovative idea, how to find alternative revenue. We must find that alternative revenue because we must pay that tax. We must pay those debts. We must pay those debts in order to be alive economically. That must be done. Any other thing we are talking about here, Suleiman, is just trying to add additional things. But I believe the most important thing government has to do is to look inward and say, what can we do? Let them call some Nigerians. Let them stop thinking they know it all. Let them call some Nigerians. Nothing is wrong with that. Nothing is wrong with calling some Nigerians and say, what do you think? How do we solve this problem?
Right. Paul, let's bring you back in here. I mean, Mr. Wabara is saying, look, it's really not about those. He thinks the issue of buying vehicles and all of that, they are minor issues. The real fundamental issues here is there seems to be a lack of an economic management team that has the ideas as to how exactly to diversify Nigeria's revenue base.
Well, I cannot agree with Mr. Wabara, a very good friend of mine, but he also understands the concept of economics. If you say that you don't want a house to be flooded, but you open a tap that makes room for flooding to happen, you cannot handle Nigerian issue only on revenue window. If you don't block leakages, one of which we don't need, I see no reason why every 4 years, and not just vehicles, even unnecessary expenditure that we see in the budget, not just for legislature, even for executive. So as much as you make revenue, which I alluded to, and there are several revenue windows which I've shared, not just for federal, even the state. I've mentioned that government can generate up to 30 trillion naira from several windows. I've had that conversation on this platform and so many other platforms around the country.
For the benefit of this conversation, it would be nice to hear what exactly those.
Okay, I give you an instance. I give you an instance. In 2020, the National Bureau of Statistics revealed that two of the sectors that grew in leaps and bounds were banking sector and telco sector, which include telco infraco. The question is, of the revenues that these two two sectors got from the analysis that came from the Bureau of Statistics, what percentage of revenue paid to government increase, it actually reduced for the two sectors. Recently, you saw what banks had declared that they have made. What percentage of this money is going to cover some government? And I'm talking of institutions, and there are so many of them, at least 25 different sectors like this in Nigeria that are not paying what should go to government and what should accurately go to government. In fact, one of the major drivers, one of the major players in telco is not in Nigeria, and they took wealth of Nigeria and took to another country. I don't want to mention the country in the Middle East. You know, based on research we have done, at least Nigeria should not get less than 600 billion naira from that organization. But what did we get? We have federal government that don't communicate properly with states, and when it comes to revenue that should go overall to government, there are no communication. These are strategy, these are part research-based findings that we have documentary evidence on how we can grow our revenue today. But I must put a caveat. If you grow your revenue and your revenue base is so huge, but you have children who don't care about how money is made, they don't mind to drink any bottle of champagne, and you believe that it's also part of the economy, we will ask, who is producing the champagne? Is that economy? If you say that we should continue to give our money to Japan, who is getting the job? When you import, there are three decisions. It's important for our listener. Right. There are three decisions. You are telling your population, and this is what Mr. Wabara is saying, that Nigeria should remain unemployed. So long as we can give jobs to Japanese to continue to produce our cars, we have enough scene in the East that can produce the same car for us. If you think it's not safe, then why do you think it's safe for Nigeria to buy the vehicles? In America, they don't present other countries' vehicle. I am not saying you can't even spend your 168 million, but spend it on the economy. Let it create jobs, and let our foreign reserve not get depleted.
Let me bring Odelim back. When I asked the question about if Nigeria is truly broke, that's something philosophical and logical here for us to take out. We're talking about a country that has about $4 to $6 billion, translating to 16.25 trillion naira as a loss to crude oil theft alone between 2009 and 2020. You can quote the Speaker of the House of Representatives, Tajuddin Abbas, on that. That's on one hand. We've also talked about the revenue that the country is losing from solid mineral resources and a plethora of things that the country is not putting its hands on. So, Odelim, truly, how can we stop these leakages that is making everyone think that Nigeria so blessed yet so poor?
The problem is that we look at the small issues and we focus on those small issues. I've told you, I think I was on your program some time ago, we have to bring economic restructuring. That economic restructuring will entail who does what and how do we move this economy. Are we going to be import-dependent economy? Are we going to be internally dependent economy? Are we going to grow small businesses? These are the issues I think we can be looking at very at this present time. All the issues of leakages, I'm happy with the leakages, but this will not solve the problem. Maybe cut this cost, but it will not solve the problem you invited me to talk about. I've told you that when the economy is in this type of dilemma, you bring people who will tell you how to get out of it. America got out of Great Depression when Roosevelt, in the 30s, in the late 30s and thereabouts, solved the restructuring of American economy and the financing of American economy. We have to look at this level I'm talking about, not the level of whether somebody will produce this, because unless you restructure the economy and make it not an import-dependent economy, you grow the economy. As soon as you grow the economy, you grow revenue, because revenue does not drop from the sky. Banks might be leakages through the bank, but you leave that one for the Central Bank of Nigeria, because I have said time without number that the Central Bank has to actually unbundle itself by creating a system that focuses on managing the activities of commercial banks. But Central Bank will focus on monetary policy. So these are the kind of changes. And also, Suleiman, I want you to agree with me that our judicial system is also a problem. You see, we have to look at the complexity of Nigerian economy. Let's stop looking at the economy from its narrow point of view. If you want us to talk about the narrow economics, we talk about narrow economics. But We are talking about a country that must move its economy to $1 trillion. And to move that economy to $1 trillion economy, it means that we find alternatives. I'm not against borrowing. If we can borrow to focus on financing small business, if we can borrow to finance essential infrastructure, we borrow. China continued to borrow until the late 90s. And up to now, China borrows. America is a continuous borrowing country. It is what you spend the money you borrow on that matters. So
that's the challenge. So let's bring in Paul Alaje. Look, just like Enwebara said, it's a complex situation. He's talking about economic restructuring. I wish I could stay on him to, help us understand what form or what manner of economic restructuring we're talking about. Where do we need to start from? But maybe you want to take it from that point. And Wale Edun also says there is a need for government to spend more. If government is to spend more, where will it get the funds from? It's really complex, isn't it?
First of all, priority of government must be clear. Why are we spending money? Nobody runs his business or office the way we are running Nigeria and expect growth. Check. How have we been running Nigeria? In the past 5, in the past 10 years, and the past 15 years, if we run our private businesses like these, are we going to see growth?
How do we need to run it now?
I tell you, so to make progress, we need to ask ourselves question: what are the real drivers of development? What are the real drivers of growth? What are the things we must do? And I will say these are the things we must do. The bedrock of all development for any nation is energy, is power, and transport. The way, if you want to know how Nigeria is, look at our transport system. If you want to know the future of our country, check our energy level. How much power are we able to produce? But most importantly, will be in what are we prioritize. I will quickly speak about debt. You see, there are 3 rules when it comes to debt. The list of the rule which we call the necessary condition in economics is what is your level of debt to GDP. In Nigeria, there is still room, but don't make decision. In economics, don't make decision until you see the sufficient level. The sufficient condition is what is happening to debt service, revenue to debt service. The rules is if it's more than 33%, it make mention of China. Check China's revenue to debt service. It is not up to that. Check America that he mentioned. Nigeria is 98%. If you don't understand comprehensively economic decision, economic policy, and you just mention it in passing, it's capable of destroying the nation. People advise government to devalue Naira. Where have we landed, all of us? We are now have to kill in Abuja for PMS because things are getting tougher. Inflation, according to the Bureau of Statistics, not my figure, 27.33%. Economics is not as simple as we think it is. We must have a comprehensive knowledge of it. Now, debt service, which is the sufficient condition in economics, is more than 98%. Does it even make sense for us to say we should keep borrowing? The last part, which is the most important, and I have to say this, is what is happening, what is the impact of debt? Debt has grown on the average by 25% in the last 5 and the last 6 years, but what has happened to growth? The growth has only grown by 2%, which means even the money that is borrowed is not impacting the economy. Does it mean that we have used the money to build individual bank accounts? Does it mean that we have not really grown the economy with the money?
I think these questions, Jermaine, I really do hope that we can keep the conversations on. Economist Odelim Enwebara, Paul Alaje, would like to thank you for your time, and for those who really would want to catch up on the conversations from these 2 leading minds, you can catch up on our website, arise.tv.